Word. And you can go ahead.
Okay, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Chris Hamerla. I work for Golden Sands Resource Conservation and Development Council based out of Stevens Point. We're a non-for-profit. We do a lot of outreach education in the conservation world, but also for agriculture, for private landowners, public lands, and then obviously our regional AIS program that currently consists of myself and my latest new coworker, Kendra. She's on board today, watching as well. So we're going to cover what the heck is a purple loosestrife mass rearing cage. And I guess I should also say that Kendra and I cover pretty much the central portion of the state, Taylor, currently Lincoln, but that will be changing, Marathon, Portage, Wood, Clark, Waushara, Wapaka, Monroe, Green Lake, Marquette. So that gives you kind of an idea where we're located. But what is this mass rearing cage? Well, first of all, we spoke a lot about purple loosestrife biocontrol today. So what is purple loosestrife biocontrol? For maybe there's some new people here. In a nutshell, it's raising the Galerucella beetles for the purpose of releasing them out into the wild to help manage dense purple loosestrife areas. And the reason we might do that is maybe these areas are otherwise inaccessible. Maybe there's just too many to go and manually remove. Or like we learned about earlier today, if working on roadsides, these are areas that maybe we get limited chances to work there. So we can place these beetles out there and then they can work year round. And essentially what we're doing is we're going out into the wild, collecting beetle stock. We're putting them on plants that we've raised, and then we're hoping they reproduce, and then you've got that many more. You can start with potentially 10 beetles on a potted plant, and if you're lucky, maybe you end up with 1,000 that you can release. So if we look at the screen real quick, you'll see I've got those are eggs on a leaf, if we're looking at the left-hand side. Of course, those hatch into that grayish larva, or a yellowish larva. And as they start to mature, they're going to travel down the plant and go into the soil, and they're going to pupate, which is second to the last photograph on the right. You can start to see that the legs are forming, and it's forming into its beetle shape. And then finally it turns into the beetle that emerges out of the soil. And that's the critter that's going to be doing a lot more damage and flying to other plants and helping out in control. So that's essentially what we're trying to do. And a lot of times when we start working with volunteers or we just get going in this project, we start out simple. And by simple, it means maybe I have a swimming pool or two, and early in the spring, when the marshes just start to thaw out, we're going to go out into the marsh or wherever you have your purple loosestrife plants. We're going to dig up some rootstock. We're going to bring it back. We're going to pot that into some swimming pools. And that's as simple as it needs to be. And of course, we're going to put nets on those pots right away, because that's going to keep predators out. It's going to trap heat and allow those plants to grow a little bit quicker. So you do this for a year or two, and then you start to get a little more confident, and maybe you expand that and you get more plants. But at a certain point, maybe you want to jump into a mass rearing cage. So here is a mass rearing cage. Now there's several ways that you can do this, but essentially what this is, instead of having limited space in, say, a kiddie swimming pool where you might have half a dozen plants or so in there, this gives you the ability to raise a lot more. Now there's some pros and cons to this, but we'll cover that in a little bit. This is one of my volunteers over in Marshfield. To say that he and his wife are volunteers is almost an understatement. This is a love of life for them. They go way above and beyond. But here's some different examples of mass rearing cages. Now, when we're talking about a mass rearing cage, typically the setup that Jeannie or the state has is a 12 by 12 frame with a net on it. There's several different ways that I've got pictured here on how you could set that up. Tom had sent me some pictures. This is the Siren School, and you can see inside the top left, you can see that in their cages, they still put the swimming pools inside of there, and then the potted plants are inside those swimming pools. If you go down below that, there's Barry and Carol, my volunteers. We patterned our mass rearing cage off of the Green Lake Sanitary District, where we built a frame on the bottom, and we have a rubberized or a neoprene roofing material on the bottom, and we create a little wetland or a pool in there, and then the pots can just be scattered wherever we want to inside of there. So similarly with Carol and Barry, they still pot their plants and we put them in there. If we look at the Green Lake Sanitary District, now theirs is a really huge mass rearing cage. They extended it so it's not just a 12 by 12, it's actually 12 by 24 foot. They have the pond built on the bottom. However, instead of potting their plants, they just take their roots, they dig them up, and they dump them in there and let them grow. So it's pretty much a very hands-off approach. It seems to have worked fairly well for them throughout the years. So it's another option that's out there. Let's take a closer look at the basic setup of the cage. So again, you may or may not have the modified pool made that we did with the rubberized material, but at any level, you get the piping from the state or Genie, and basically you start erecting it. If you are going to build it the way that we've done in Marshfield and like Green Lake County did, or a sanitary district did, make sure, my picture over here on the right-hand side, make sure that you give yourself an option on how to drain the water a little bit. And that'll help you out if you are potting plants, that you get that appropriate water depth. Something I didn't mention earlier is, I'm going to scroll back here real quick. You can see the pots in this picture. We don't want the water level all the way up to the top of the pot. All you need is enough water so that those plants continue to, the pots can soak up water and the roots get the water they need. You need plenty of soil up above the water level, because when those beetles or the larvae go down and they're going to pupate into a beetle, they can't be underwater. They need enough soil that they're not going to drown. So they have to be above the water level. So being able to manage your water levels inside these cages or a swim pool or however you're doing it is very important. Again, it's just a matter of, you're going to have your vertical poles going up. You've got your base poles along the bottom and on the top, and your midsection connectors. Genie and I have been talking, and the cost of materials, as you may expect, has just gone through the roof. I believe some people have tried to make this out of PVC. That might be an option. Just make sure you've got enough supports. One of the issues a lot of times that we've had is, if, for example, these pictures all come from my volunteers over by Marshfield, and we're putting this up typically maybe at the end of March or real early April. And if you get heavy rains or even snowfall events, if you don't have enough structural support, that can get really heavy on top of the netting and cause some issues. So make sure you've got enough. You can see the center support there in the main cage. Once you've got your cage set up, then it's just a matter of mixing up your potting soil, potting your rootstock, and then getting your pots transported into your netting. And the earlier you can do this, the better. Couple of things I'm going to say for new people coming on. I know when I first started doing this, sometimes I would skimp on the potting soil or fertilizer. Don't skimp on the potting soil. You definitely want to give these plants all the benefit that they can to grow and grow fast. We've had some really strange springs lately this year, or the last couple of years, and sometimes the beetles are out before your plants are even big enough to really accept them. And then you've done all that work and you don't have enough food for your beetles. So use good potting soil. Get these roots dug as early as you can. How early is too early? There's really not a too early. If you can go out into a marsh And if you're able to dig these roots out, even if you've got a little bit of ice clinging to the bottom of the roots, that's fine. And sometimes you'll go into a certain part of a marsh and it's iced up yet where you try digging with a shovel and all you're doing is hitting ice. But if you go to an area that maybe gets a little bit more sunlight, you might be able to find these sweet spots where you can start digging roots. Take advantage of that early setup. And again, by having your nets on right away, that helps trap extra heat. And if you can locate your plants somewhere where they're getting a lot of sunlight, even up against maybe the wall of a garage or a building that's going to trap extra heat, that'll allow them to grow that much quicker. One of the things we found in our mass rearing cages too is by having this black rubberized material that forms the base of our pond, it acts like a wetland with that mucky, dark sediment that can trap sunlight and it warms that water up, and it just allows those plants to grow a little bit quicker. Now, of course, one of the challenges might be that when it comes time to collect thousands of beetles that are in a mass rearing cage, how do you do that? Well, traditionally, what Green Lake Sanitary District did is outside of their mass rearing cage, and this is the picture in the center bottom with the two people there, they actually had other plants outside of the cage that we would grow. And then these would be basically our transport plants. So as the beetles start to come out inside the cage and they're eating all the plants, we would take these fresh plants, bring them into the mass rearing cage and leave them there for an hour or a few hours or even overnight. And a lot of the beetles would fly over to these fresh plants to start feeding. So then we would net those plants and we would take those out into the marsh and release them. That's one way of doing it. However, again, Tom, who has now transitioned to Lincoln County, but used to be an AIS coordinator up north, got the idea of using a shop vac and sucking the beetles in that way. And he would create these mesh socks that would trap the beetles. So the beetles aren't getting sucked all the way into the vacuum cleaner. They're just getting caught in the sock. But that was a very quick way of collecting a lot of beetles. And that's the picture that you're actually seeing in the center top. Those are two mesh socks with thousands of beetles. And those thousands of beetles were collected in minutes. So very efficient. Again, the upper left corner, you can see a picture of my volunteer Barry sucking in beetles. So that's how you collect thousands of beetles in a very short period of time. And then when it comes to releasing thousands of beetles, here's the benefit of using this method. On the right-hand side, you can see those two socks again with the beetles in it that we made. Those are approximately 10 inches long. So how many thousands of beetles do I have in those two little itty bitty socks versus my car with about 10 potted purple loosestrife plants? That's a mess to carry. And I thought about this earlier when the folks were talking about working in the right-of-ways. How much simpler would it be if you could just take out these socks with these beetles and place all your beetles out there? The downside of it is potentially you've got potted plants with larvae yet. So you're not getting those out to your area. However, in certain circumstances, this could be a very easy way to move a lot of beetles. So some of the pros and cons on how you want to set up a mass rearing cage. The way that my volunteers have been doing it with the rubberized pond down on the bottom, it's easy to maintain in summer. It's very easy to walk through. The plants aren't overcrowded. You can kind of shift them around if you've got ones that are growing a little faster because depending how the sunlight is, it's really easy to shift them around. The downside, initially it's a little more expensive to get set up. I'll show you a little bit some winter maintenance that needs to be done. So in the photograph that Tom had sent me, it's a little more inexpensive to set up just using swim pools. Everything can be easily put away for the winter. So those are some of the upsides to doing it that way. And again, depending how much space you have might dictate how you want to set up your mass rearing cage. I wanted to talk a little bit about winter care. So my volunteers live out in the country. They've got room in their yard where they're they're happy to have this set up this way. However, we do end up putting snow fence around it or some type of fencing, because otherwise the deer come through and they're going to want to drink in there, and we just don't want them to step and end up puncturing the rubberized matting with their hooves or anything like that. So just something to think about that way. And of course, you're taking your netting down every year because UV is going to wreck stuff. So why leave it out any longer than you need to? Jeannie can kind of give an update on the price of the nets. I know a number of years ago, those nets used to run about $500 for one of the mass rearing cage nets. I'm not sure what they're up to now, but I know Jeannie was looking into that. And obviously any snow damage, you want to mitigate any problems with that as well. So collecting your purple loosestrife beetles, how do we do it? I'm sticking with my Ghostbuster theme this year. Well, it kind of looks the same, right? I mean, yeah. On the right is the shop vac that Golden Sands has purchased to do this. It's nice and compact. However, you have to carry it in your hand. And when I brought this over for Barry to use, Barry quickly decided that he can one-up me and he'll just get a backpack unit. So again, same principle, but two different types of shop vacs. These are both cordless. So if you're going to be working in areas that are wet and you don't want to have a big long electrical cord in there with you, this is probably the way to go. Also, his cage is set up well away from the house. So again, having a cordless unit was very beneficial. Really, the only thing that I added to this was you can see that there's the vacuum cleaner itself and the hose that comes off of it. The problem with the hose is typically you want to increase the suction power, so the hose always necks down. What we want to do is actually reduce the power of the suction. So next to the hose there, you'll see that I've got an adapter that allows it. It's actually made to reduce. I just flipped it around so it actually opened up the diameter of the tube that would have the suction on it. And then I bought that extra tube that you see on the bottom there that can go on there, just increases your reach for reaching the top of the net. And then that increased diameter also allows you to put the sock in there that's going to collect the beetles. And the socks are just made out of the same material that we use for our purple loosestrife nets that we put on the pots. We just sewed them up. They taper down at the bottom so that they can fit inside the tube. And then the end that is sticking outside of the tube is a little bit wider so that it can be wrapped around the outside of the tube. You can see that picture on the upper right-hand corner. In that picture, Tom is actually holding on to the netting so it doesn't get sucked into the vacuum. But if you just use a stout rubber band, it'll also hold it on top of there. And if you find you have too much suction, you can always drill a hole in this tube down further, or a couple of holes, and that'll reduce the suction on there. And if you need a little bit more aggressive suction, you can always just put your finger over the holes. So that can help you vary how much pressure you have or suction you have. A few other helpful hints. This is just for purple loosestrife, basically in general, if you're going to raise it. But as early as you can dig your roots, the better. And sometimes your marshes and your wetlands might be froze, but if you've got a lake or a water body that's opened up already, if you've got purple loosestrife out in those areas, those will be ready to dig well before some of the marshes, just because the ice is out and they warm up quicker. Again, adding your nets immediately after you pot the plants will help keep predators out and help trap heat in the soil, allow those plants to grow quicker. On the bottom right, more is not always better. You want to give your plants enough airspace and sunlight availability to grow as best they can. So jamming more in there is not helpful. Snipping off the tops. If you look over on the left-hand side, this is something I forgot to do early on when I started doing this. The last few years, by once these plants get up maybe 8 to 12 inches high, snip the tops off and they'll start to bush out and you'll have a lot more area branching that the beetles will be able to feed on. And again, in the bottom middle, just remembering to have your support systems in case of heavy rains or snowfalls earlier in the year. So with that, if there's any questions, we can go back and I can help you out with that.
I think we do have a couple. I'm also, Tom put a couple of videos in the box showing collecting beetles using the shop vac. So I just threw those into the chat too. Let's see, go back here. Well, Matt had asked how tall the cage was and I let him know in the chat 6 foot.
Oh, yep.
And then I mentioned, you know, people do also just collect with the soda bottle setup or into the plastic bags too, Ziploc bag.
Yep.
Beetle buster. Everybody loves the beetle buster. Patrick asked, have you seen any issues with beetles escaping the mass rearing cage when opening it to enter and leave?
A little bit, but not, you know, it's not like you've got a cage full of butterflies where they're flying around real quick and erratic. I mean, the beetles are pretty much just hanging out. However, thank you for that question. It did make me think, again, these two volunteers, Barry and Carol, they documented everything. In fact, they had it down, I would say, to almost the hour or half hour that was most beneficial to collect the beetles, because at a certain time of day, a lot of the beetles would actually leave the plants if a certain part of the cage was warmer. You know, if they knew a certain day was going to be warmer than other days, it was easier to collect. But no, as far as beetles escaping, it wasn't a big issue.
I think it seems that Brock had told me that sometimes if you keep 1 or 2 plants outside of the cage, then they're going to want to go find their food. So
Yeah,
most likely they will go to a plant if you have it right outside the cage.
yep. In fact, the area, when you look at this bottom left-hand corner picture of the two volunteers, you see some pine trees behind them, but that's just a windrow. If you go back behind there, they've got actually like a 40-acre parcel that's all restored prairie, but there's purple loosestrife out there, and that's what they're really focusing on controlling. But with the abundance of plants that we have inside the cage here, they actually get beetles that'll fly from outside of the netting, and they'll be on the outside of the net because they're trying to get plants. So yeah,
Carol and I tried to make a guesstimate of how many beetles they probably got this year, which they were generous enough to share some with the folks in the Green Bay area doing their project. But just to be conservative, rather than going with 1,000, we estimated a little lower and figured they probably had 80,000 beetles they reared this year in that cage. Paul Skwinski asks, how do you get the beetles out of the socks?
just turn the sock inside out.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's so, and again, if you're going to collect this many beetles, I mean, you're going to have an area that warrants putting that many beetles out there. Now, of course, if you've got smaller areas, just don't suck as many beetles in. You know, kind of, you want to plan ahead and figure, okay, what kind of areas am I releasing these beetles into? Because if maybe it's a dense patch, but it's only, you know, whatever, 10 yards by 20 yards. Okay, maybe I only need not as many beetles, but maybe I'm going into a big wetland and it's just, there's 40 acres of consistent purple loosestrife. Okay, now I could take this bigger amount of beetles. And yeah, it's just a mattering. So in this picture here, on the left-hand side, you can see where can you see my cursor or no?
Yeah.
Okay, you can see where the sock is sewn off. This end would be open, and right now they've got just a rubber band or like a wire tie on there, whatever. But you get out and you can just you open it up and just start turning the sock inside out, and you can kind of maneuver around with your kayak or walking or however you're able to get around that area and release those beetles. And of course, these are all adults anyway, so they're going to just start distributing themselves. They're going to fly to wherever they want to go, and start feeding on plants.
You can just brush them off with your hand, Chris, the ones that don't fly off.
Yep. Or if you want to be more gentle, I mean, just by blowing on it, they're going to fall off.
Yeah.
Yep.
Stephanie asked if you thought old pantyhose would work as well as.
I think they would work fantastic.
Probably.
Yeah.
People don't wear them much anymore, though. It might be hard to find them.
The only thing that you'll run into a problem with there is the first socks that my wife and I sewed up. We made them just like a straight sock, just like think of pantyhose or like a sock that you're gonna wear on your feet. And the problem with that is you need to have it tapered. So you can see these are kind of tapered at one end. And the reason being is if you don't taper it, when you put that sock inside the tube, it has a tendency to bunch up. So I'm not saying it's gonna cause any problems with the beetles getting sucked in, but it just seems to work better if you have it tapered down a little bit. It fits in the tube easier. It allows the beetles to get sucked in easier. And again, with the amount of the hose and the tube with that length, it didn't seem like we had any problems with the beetles getting sucked in too hard and getting crushed or hitting each other and getting damaged. They seemed to be fine. But if somebody noticed that they were having that problem, I would just say take a drill and drill a hole or two inside your tube, and that'll reduce the amount of suction.
Kevin Juno posted the pantyhose could stretch into the vacuum, and I bet you, yeah, it is because it's a stretchy material where the netting isn't. That's a really good point.
Yep.
Hi, Chris. This is Zach Stewart from Douglas County. Thanks for a great presentation here. And I guess the efficiency of the mass rearing method is definitely appealing to me. And it seems that you've been able to achieve pretty good volunteer involvement as well. I just finished my first season of doing purple loosestrife beetles, and I'm hoping to do it again next year. And this year we went with the model of potting up small groups of plants and then distributing those to the care of volunteers all around the county. I'm interested in your mass rearing approach here because it seems a lot more efficient, but I'm curious whether you have had good success with feeling like you can get a lot of volunteers involved and get people, educated, and what that looks like as far as your process for involving the volunteers.
Oh, this is really the fortune of finding the right people at the right time, I guess. These two have always been interested in raising purple loosestrife. They're in an area that has enough purple loosestrife that it's important for them that they wanted to do this. If you've got the best scenario would be if you had like a nature center or even a public library that you could get some volunteers where you could get more public viewing and interaction with this, that would be great. That's kind of the benefit of doing the smaller batches, but I don't know if I'm answering your question. I kind of lucked out. I ran into these volunteers where we were doing, basically these volunteers started out with a couple of pools, and every year they're like, I'll bring me a few more pools. I'll bring me a few more pools. And at that point, I'm like, no, wait a minute. You've got 8 swim pools here. Why don't we just go to a mass rearing cage? And and they thought that was a great idea.
Yeah, the capitals, I haven't talked to Barry ever, but I've talked to Carol, and she's a force to be reckoned with. Love
On top of
beetles.
all these purple loosestrife beetles they raise, I think she released, oh my goodness, well over 300 monarch caterpillars this year, or butterflies.
There's
Wow.
Yeah,
Well, thank you. I think the strategy is clear. I just need to switch to mass rearing, and then I need to find a Carol.
there you
Yeah,
go.
yeah. You know, but yeah, I guess if you're working with your volunteers and you've got that handful of volunteers that are they're always looking to add another pool. You know, if they're already up to 4 swim pools already, well, they're taking up the same amount of space a mass rearing cage could basically, but they could get a lot more done. And
Yeah. Ann Lane put a note in here about Burnett County and Cyrene High School, they've been doing this for, oh gosh, I bet it's, from what I could find, maybe 20 years or more, Ann. It seems like I do it as a science project. And the first year I did beetles with volunteers, we didn't have a mass rearing cage, but I did it with a school group. It was mostly the adults that did it, but in the high school kids, they were the muscle for digging the plants in the spring. So yeah, sometimes we get creative. One of these mass rearing cages, actually a couple cool things that have come up in this last year is in Washington County. Eric Hansen knows about this one because it started right when he did. And the Nature Conservancy, a local one, wanted to do beetles. And then we had a couple lake groups contact us. They just wanted to buy beetles, which that doesn't happen. We don't do that. So I got them together, me and Sam at the time, Lammers, and they worked out a deal. And so the Conservancy is raising beetles for the area, and the lake groups are giving them donations to do so. And then here in for Lake Koshkanon, which is, it's in both Jefferson and Rock County, the local wetlands group is giving funds through a grant that they put together to do a purple loosestrife cage for rearing. And for Lake Koshkanon wetlands, but for anywhere else within the Rock River Basin, and they giving that to the Rock River Coalition. So there's some creative ways to get some things done. As I noted up, someone asked about cost, and it's nets just, I got a notice not long ago, they're up to about $625, and it has to do with supply and all that. I have 3 or 4 nets that need some repairs. Screen windows I hear work great, and I still have to work on that. That's a winter project. So there are a couple of nets available. They won't be perfect, but. And then the pipe sets that we bought with the last of my purple Loosestrife Biocontrol money last year, it was a gift account. The people used to donate $10, $20 to participate, and we need to use that money up. So I bought 2 sets of pipes that actually, those went to Tom up there because we were getting some people reset that had, like those Burnett County cages were tremendously old. So interesting comment from Chris Larson, and Dave Bloomer used a thing that looked like a reverse paint sprayer. It's pretty creative there and collected in the paint jar. Let's see.
another comment I wanted to make, I was thinking about this, is like the Green Lake Sanitary District traditionally, and I haven't been down there in the last couple springs because Anna Caesar had been working with them, but the photograph here again on the right hand side, the upper, where you can see it's just the dug up root masses of purple loosestrife, and they're kind of lined in there. They leave them in there over winter, and the plants do come back. There is a little bit of carryover of some beetles and larvae from the year before. The one problem that I have that I did see in there one time is there's all kinds of other things that start living in there. So you do end up with a lot of spiders and dragonflies. I went in one day to check on the beetles, and there was a hatch of probably, I don't know, 200 dragonflies in there. And I'm sure that was like living in a buffet for them. So
Mm,
one of the downsides to not refreshing your rootstock, or having it open like Green Lake does, is sometimes you can run into issues like that.
yeah. Two quick questions, and then we'll segue into my little side trip here. And I'm going to use Matt's question to do that. So the two quick questions are, Amy asked how wide the socks are. Maybe you covered that in your other thing about the socks. And then Steph asked the peak horsepower of the shop vac.
Oh, good questions. The sock, I think, I want to say it was like, I've got the dimensions written down. I apologize. I should have brought them into this. But it really depends on the diameter of the tube that you're using on your vacuum. Like I think mine was 2 inches at the sewed off base. And I think it was like 4.5 or 5 inches that would allow it. If you look on the bottom left-hand corner here, you needed at least 4.5 or 5 inches to be able to fit on the outside of the tube here.
Mm.
But I can get that out to Jeannie or to the group. And then the horse, a lot of these shop vacs, there's not a huge selection of variety that you can get, and B, they don't vary a whole lot. So it's not like you're going to go to a hardware store and find six different portable shop vacs, with different horsepower. I don't remember. I don't know offhand.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to stop sharing, and I'll go ahead and share mine. This is all related. And then, oh shoot, I lost my chat screen. Let me get that back so I can see what.
I will say that the shop vacs are for those that are committed to doing this. I think at the end of the day, it was somewhere between 150 and $200 to get the shop vac and get it set up.
Okay.
But it is the amount of time and effort that it saves is well worth it.
Yeah, you might just save on your staff time that much. So Matt's question here, we thought about doing this close to the Dunlop Hollow site. That's a site that Brock used for, I think, his entire time. It's a large hollow in the northwest part of Dane County, and it's filled with purple loosestrife. Some areas look great. Some areas are getting a little sketchy, but he collected beetles. He had a mass rearing cage there for many years. And Matt said, well, we thought about if we do it, just opening the nets and letting the beetles out, and then transplanting or, moving the plants around to the larvae to other sites nearby. And that's exactly how Brock did it. He would set up his mass rearing cage in a wetland in some instances, and then just open it up and let them go. And they would just fly off to fresh food and take it from there. And then they'd go down and overwinter in the soil. And that's one of the reasons that's such a great insectary today. I helped him take that out maybe 3 years ago now, maybe slightly more, because nobody was actually working it at the time. Challenging to do it in a wetland. I spent more time pulling myself out of the muck than actually helping very much, but there was 3 of us. We eventually got it out. And so, you got to be a little creative there, or careful. And then, yeah, I noticed when I drove from Dunlop Hollow up the highway to the one side, there's purple loosestrife all the way up. It's just lots of work to be done over there. But so I use that to segue over here to, those starter beetles. It was just last Wednesday, I think, that, oh shoot, I forgot who got me going on this. Yeah, you can raise your hand in the chat if you want. But I already got my first question about, where can I find, I know, it was Derek, right? Up there in Florence, Langlade, and Oconto counties. And he is like, of anywhere that we already know that beetles generally show up, so that we could have starter beetles find them ourselves next year. And I dug around for everything I have available that I could get at fairly quickly, and I couldn't find anything. And it just got me thinking. So before I go into that, I just want to say thank you again to everybody who did Purple Loosestrife Biocontrol, regardless of which step in the process you're involved in this year. We've got people doing so many different things. Some of you are still at the monitoring stage, and that's just fine. You got to know what you've got out there before you bother starting a project like this, because it can be quite work intensive. And so we've had people rearing and releasing the beetles, sowing the nets, scouting and reconfirming sites for plants and looking for insectaries. And then there's a lot of outreach and support to your partners. You could tell from Chris's presentation, he does an awful lot with his partners there to keep things rolling. And then, of course, there's getting through all the data entry. And yes, I'm still behind, but working on it. So any of you who have your own data and can go ahead and get that in there, I appreciate it so much. So the beetles are a problem, have been for the last few years, and it probably has to do with climate change, extreme weather events, polar vortices, all that kind of thing. And so there's just, the timing is complicated. It probably all was, but Brock, the whirling dervish that he is, he was all over the state collecting those beetles and making sure people got to them. And in some cases, people were learning to do it themselves. But, beetle rearing and the release and finding your beetles, for starters, can be impacted by several things. There's the time and the funding that you have available. There's a lot of work to be done, and maybe you just really don't have the funding to put into every aspect of this. Weather, as I mentioned, it's confounding the time of plant growth versus beetle emergence. As I tell people over and over, what Brock always told people and what Chris just said, you need to get your plants dug early, and you need to get the nets on them immediately. Over and over again, I've gone out to help people, and they still didn't. They had them growing in the shade with no nets. Well, those plants are probably not going to be big enough to take the beetles once we bring them to you or you get them yourself. And then getting everybody on board so that all these other timelines fall into place. It can just get complicated. So the starter beetles, that has turned out to be the most complicated part of all. Like this year, I'm out collecting beetles on plants that were 6 inches tall. We had the polar vortex again that came late in the year. The plants were stunted, but the beetles were everywhere. The good side of that is possibly that means that those plants aren't going to grow real good last year, because they got really pounded by the beetles. So overwintering, digging early, putting those nets on can help with the plants you're going to put the beetles on. And then, those netted plants, many of us who've done this have seen it in person, that those netted plants in full sunshine, or like Chris suggested, next to a garage with reflected heat and light, will generally end up taller than what's on the sites. A lot of beetle locations, for starters, we just don't know where all our insectaries are yet. We've got a lot of new partners in counties that have never done purple loosestrife before. Maybe Brock didn't even do it there. As far as getting the beetles to people, the way my job is structured is very different from Brock's. I can't run all over the state like he did, as much as I would love to. And then we're just still working on getting those insectary, that kind of record built. And we'll keep working on that. So, and then, like I said, polar vortexes, snowstorms, eek. And so I got to thinking about our mass rearing cages and Chris doing this presentation. I thought, well, maybe there's a way we can double use these mass rearing cages. So mass rearing cages, one of the, well, back up first here to this research. So Blasi is, he is a biocontrol expert in the country. He is, he was involved with this. He's been involved in research for garlic mustard. I think he's doing work on the Japanese knotweed biocontrol and many other things. And in one of his papers that I was reviewing last week said that if you're overwintering beetles outdoors versus back when they used to do them in labs and indoor greenhouses, then beetles are going to come out healthier and more successful. So that's definitely a point in the favor of if we can figure out how to use mass rearing cages to rear beetles. So we've got some potential here already. We've got cages that are being used in various parts of the state. I have a few spares. And we've often seen beetles show up on plants that were just dug. People go to pot them and then they look again and, oh, there's a beetle climbing on that. Or if they've overwintered plants and they'll be coming up out of the soil in the plant, which is a reminder, don't clean your roots off real good. You never know what's in there. And then some methods of rearing the plants might be conducive to this. So maybe a twist on what the Green Lake or Barry and Carroll are doing. The beetles, to have a lot of beetles overwintering, they need to have access to the soil, and a lot of soil litter needs to be built up, like leaves and things. But there would probably have to be some pilots to give that a shot. Well, there definitely would. So I want to open up a discussion going forward, not necessarily all today, just going forward to discuss with the DNR and our partners to actually pilot this in some locations. In particular, maybe give it a shot up where we've got some folks that there is just no insectary around. But then also try it in some areas where we do know where things are, and because they already have some methods established and they're used to doing the mass rearing cage. There's got to be some clarification to try the methods. We don't want to just kind of go helter-skelter on this. We want to plan, and we might need to come up with some extra funds. I spent down that gift account, and I did not really plan in a lot of money for this year for buying cages and pipes. And then, you know, maybe find some partners. Eric Hansen, I thought of you right away because of Carroll University wanting to get back into biocontrol. Maybe there's an opportunity there for a student project right there on site. And then, so I have long-term goals with this. I want to see if it'll help reduce overall cost and effort for the partners. That collection takes a lot of time. And it seems like every time I've done it, it ends up being something like Memorial Day weekend, where not only are we out collecting the beetles, we have to go put them on the plants because the volunteer, it's Memorial Day weekend. They went up to their lake house or they went up, you know, on some vacation. You can't, you know, people are going to do their thing. It takes a lot of time, and that's on top of finding sites, coordinating partners, dealing with forms and data, digging the plants, and the actual rearing. So, and what has come up every year that I've been helping with this is we've got partners with some great insectaries, and just, you know, we're getting desperate to find beetles, and we start asking each other, and bless you all who have stepped up and helped everybody else who didn't have any beetles, because I know that probably taxed your time and your funds, and I'm very grateful for that. So we want to get away from having to do that as much as we can. And then the long-term goal here is develop more regional insectaries. So it's not just find ones that are already out there, but actually find some that we can develop, so that the mass rearing cage for the beetles isn't necessarily something we'd always do, but it could be used to help create some new insectary sites that would be useful over time. And that was the last thing I had on that. I didn't make a final slide. So we have just well, we don't have any more time, but if you don't mind taking just a couple minutes. We do have a couple questions left in here, but are there any thoughts on this in particular? And you can just go ahead and unmute. Probably wore you out. Let's see. Kevin asked two related good questions. Do beetles need to overwinter, have dormancy in the cold, or can we rear them on our plants in a heated greenhouse over winter? And that goes back to that goes back to what Blasi found, that you might be able to, but they're going to do a lot better if they are being subjected to that cold. There must be something about their metabolism that they need that. Just like some plants, seeds have to be stratified, you know, so we'd have to kind of work on that. And we don't have to test that the outdoors works better because it's been done, but how we play with that, we'd have to work on that. So if we don't have any other questions, just go ahead and shoot me an email if you're interested in playing around with this idea. I'll be talking with we have our full slate of DNR AIS regional coordinators, and